It's easy to have expectations about money that aren't perfectly accurate. This happens with inheritances, debts, budgets, how much someone saves, costs for purchases, income, and just about everything else. But having misinformed expectations can have some unexpected effects on your finances. This is Mark Perspectives, and today we're looking at expectations versus reality, Part 2. I'm Cam Irvin, lifestyle financial planner and advisor, and this is brought to you by Irvin Wenborn. If you haven't seen Part 1 about expectations versus reality, you can watch it here. You might be thinking, Cam, why does this matter, and how does it relate to investing at all? The answer has 3 parts, and those are, number 1, investors often have expectations that are different from financial professionals. Number 2, this leads to disappointment, but also poor investing behavior, which in turn hurts returns even more. And number 3, having better expectations allows someone to make their future more stable because plans are not made using small chances and probabilities, but using real odds that are reliable. Here's a chart from Visual Capitalist. Using data from Natixis that asked 8,500 individuals and 2,700 financial advisors and professionals, the advisors' expectations are the orange circles, and the individual investors are the blue. 2 things seem to stick out here, as sometimes the gap between advisors and individuals is large, with some individuals thinking that they're going to get twice as much return as what advisors expect. I'm looking at you, US, America's number 1 once again. The other note is that in no country do the advisors and financial professionals expect to get a higher return than what the individuals expect. This means that people that don't work in finance often are not equipped with good information, so they think that things will be better than what's likely to happen. In Part 1, we showed how this results to disappointment, which leads to our next point. Investor behavior is a gigantic factor in what kind of returns a person experiences. We've talked about this in other videos, including the video Chasing Returns, where people seem to often miss the good times and the really high returns for an investment, and then they only invest once the party's over. This creates a vicious cycle that's very common. It looks like this. Let's say an investor named Peter invests his money thinking that he's going to earn 13% each and every year on his investment. In reality, though, Peter's investment returns 7% on average. So what does Peter do after 3 years of investing? He sees that he didn't get a 13% return and instead got a 7% average. So he moves his investment to something else that has recently had really high returns, maybe around 13%. And once he does that, the new investment that he just switched to starts to experience worse performance, maybe even less than 7% and potentially negative returns. Peter's a little patient, so he decides to wait it out for 3 more years. And after another disappointment of 3 years of low performance, he moves it again. The cycle keeps going over and over, so that the average investor is constantly making decisions that hurt their investment's portfolio returns. This is what's called the behavior gap. The last point here is to have better and more realistic expectations, because if you expect a lower return, you're less likely to disrupt your portfolio. That's good news. It also means that when you're planning for your future, you have a better baseline to build your projections on. Going back to Peter, let's say he invests $100,000 and thinks he'll earn 13% over the next 25 years. That means he'd end up with $2.12 million, which would be awesome. But if he actually only earns more like a 7% return, which is more realistic, then his balance is only $542,000 after 25 years. That's a difference of more than $1.5 million. This also means that if Peter plans on having about $542,000, then anything above that amount means that he'll be more than comfortable. He's got extra security, freedom, options, and choices in his life. But the opposite is not true, because if Peter thinks he's going to have $2.12 million, but he only has $542,000, he'll likely feel quite poor, and he's going to have to make some serious life changes to accommodate that, which means spending less. Now, let's be clear about something. It's easy to misinterpret this message and think that it's saying to just be fine for settling for something that's not as good. That is not the case. This is not saying be happy with less money. It's actually the opposite. Because oftentimes, investors all want the best thing. They aim too high with their expectations, but it's exactly because they aim too high that they end up often underperforming the easier and simpler option. Ironically, overzealous investors can be their own worst enemies and often are, by creating their downfall instead of their success. So going back to Peter, if he aimed for a 13% return per year, he's more likely to get a 3% return per year, according to the data. So instead of having 2.12 million or 542,000, he'd probably end up with something more like 209,000. So it's easy to see how that's a lot worse, and you end up with less by shooting for more. One last note, it's good to be wary of investments, advisors, and financial offers that offer you unusually high returns. This is how investors often get duped into poor quality investments, and then, how do you feel? You guessed it, more disappointment. If an advisor is giving you advice based on returns that are higher than other options, or outperformers, good returns, other trigger words like that, then they're probably not a good advisor. So remember, don't get sold snake oil. Instead, buy some good information. The takeaways from all this are, number 1, have a more reasonable expectation about your investments and portfolio. Get an expert's opinion, as in someone that knows what the historical data is for different investments and asset classes. Number 2, when you have more reasonable expectations, it's easier to plan your life, which has all kinds of other benefits. And number 3, switching your investment portfolio around constantly will do far more damage than just leaving it be. Your money is like a bar of soap. The more you handle it, the less you'll have. Our goal at Irvin Wenborn is to help people live better lives by improving their decision making, and we do that through a financial lens. If you want to better understand what kind of returns to expect for a portfolio, there are ways of calculating it rather simply. Reach out and we'd be happy to discuss our views with you to help you make some more informed decisions for yourself. You can find us at our website, email, and on socials. And you can also share this video with anyone that you've heard make a statement about some incredibly high returns that they expect on their investment and get their thoughts.